So, so Jake Skeets is, yeah, just like really hands down a really amazing poet. To come out with a first book. Um, you know, Eyes bottle dark and a mouthful of flowers. And when we're thinking about space, and when we're thinking about the body, and we're thinking about landscape, and we're thinking about the the poetics of being a Dene from a very specific place on Dene Nation. And so Jake, we live here in Saley, and Jake is a colleague of mine here at Dene College, and so he lives, I guess you could say, maybe east from here. I guess maybe it's southeast from Saley. But yeah, Vanderwagen, in a place called New Mexico. And so, but he also, he grew up also in Gallup. And I think when you read his book, it's I think, like a lot of Dene poets who have published books right now, I feel like it's very regional. You know, I know Dene Nation is, it's the same size as West Virginia. But one of the things about Jake's work is that, it feels very regional there in terms of being a Dene, but also how his language is able to, express, that aesthetics, or or that poetics of being a Dene, right? Um, I think very, very, very clearly. I think in the same way that Sherwin Batsui does it, and so he's a colleague of mine. He's a friend. He's a brother, and I think clan-wise, am I your son, Jake, or your cousin?
Uh, we're related somehow. I don't quite know how, but
No,
somewhere.
you're a Tskoba, huh? Right? Was that your
Yeah,
son?
second clan. Yeah, Takabaha.
Oh, okay. So yeah, all right. So that pretty much makes us brothers. Anyway, so um, Jake Skeets.
Well, yeah, Orlando or Shania, older brother.
Yeah,
Um, Thank you, and thank you all for being here tonight. It means a lot that you're able to come to this reading and sort of, just listen and partake in what we have to share. Thank you so much to my fellow artists and visionaries and people who are just not afraid to imagine things. Donna, C. Marie, Peter, and of course, Jackie. Thank you so much for sharing this space with me. I'm pretty honored to be here with you all. And I felt like, and I agree with the last comment before Orlando, about it sort of being woven together. I feel like the themes and the ideas and sort of where our imaginations are taking us are sort of being woven in sort of similar ways. Um, and I'm also going to probably share some of the same themes and ideas about landscape, about space, specifically landscape, and also just the American West, and the frontier, or what's formerly known as frontier or Indian territory. Because I feel like this particular region of the so-called United States was really the site of what was, the American dream or manifest destiny. Um, yeah, and it's still to this day we feel it, especially with the wildfires going on right now in California. Right, I've been seeing a lot of articles coming out now from Native scholars and thinkers talking about how tribes on the coast have been doing, have been in the business of avoiding wildfires like that. But because of projects like Manifest Destiny and the American Dream, we are left with these big, big wildfires. And I feel like it is out of a need for abundance. right? When you talk about the American dream, talk about manifest destiny, it's abundance, it's wealth, it's gathering, it's extraction, it's stealing, right? Um, Whereas when you talk about it from an indigenous perspective, it's more so just about being and belonging and interacting. And it's really the use of space or the interaction or even just the reverence of space um, that is more important. And I think Orlando sort of was talking about it before in the very beginning, right? Less is always more. Um, so yeah, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to read. So tonight, I'm really excited for this reading tonight because I get to do some visual stuff, which I don't get to do often in a traditional reading setting. So I'm so grateful to Jesse and Orlando for organizing this and also just for having me. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. Um, I'm going to start with the poem from my book called Drifter. So on the cover of my collection is an Avedon portrait that was taken in 1979, and the subject is actually my uncle, Benson James, and the portrait was taken in Gallup, New Mexico, where I'm from, where I consider a hometown as well, because I was bused into Gallup pretty much every day of my life, going to school. A year later, however, Benson was murdered. So it was a really interesting sort of framework in terms of how to think about Gallup's history, especially with Native and Indigenous people. And so the portrait was taken in 1979. In 1980, Benson was actually murdered in Gallup. 1985 is when Avedon finished the project, which was called In the American West. And at that point in time, Avedon sent a signed book to my family, and they received it, of course, but by the time in 1985 when they received it, Benson had already passed for about, he was already gone for about 5 years. So this is the book that was sent. So as you can see, it is signed by Avedon, and it was sort of in storage with my family for the longest time. It wasn't until I moved back to the reservation after I finished college, and I sort of came across this book again, that I realized that was sort of the focus. That was going to be the focus of my collection. And so this particular poem is really the only poem in my debut book that talks about the portrait directly, and it's called Drifter. Drifter. After Benson James, Drifter, Route 66, Gallup, New Mexico, June 30th, 1979, by Richard Avedon. Drift. To drift is to be carried by a current of air or water, but men are not the teeth of their verbs. They pry nouns open with a belt buckle to take a sip. Drifter. A drifter, carried by a current of air or water, makes his way from one place to another. See vagabond, see transient, see drunk. See a man with shoulder-length hair, dollar bills fisted, standing before a white screen. See his lips, how still, how horizon, how sunset. A train passing through. I tried to hug him through the spine. Left on the white space, his face becomes a mirror if I stare long enough. My face, charcoaled, pursed, squinting at the camera. Train horn, punch shatters the mirror. Frees him from the page. My uncle leaps from the So a lot of what was being discussed before was about space or use of space. And I generally don't like to use that phrase, use of space, right? Because for me, it's still use, right? It's turning landscape into a utility. So I tend to use, spatial reasoning or spatial reference as a way to talk about landscape, and specifically the field of the page or the white space of the page. Um, and the portrait itself is a very interesting portrait because the way Avedon sort of set up his portraits for this picture and the way he's done it, as for a particular Avedon style, is he takes his pictures in shadow, right? So orientation of light is gone. No one knows if it's what day of time it is, basically what time it is. He also puts up a white screen or a white piece of paper behind his subject so that background is erased. Right. So for me, it's kind of an erasure. And so, when I was writing the book, I was thinking a lot about white space and what white space does. And white space is sort of very real and immediate relationship with the whiteness. So this particular poem talks about that, and it's called "In the Fields," and it's the first of a series of poems that share the same title, "In the Fields." In the fields, dogs maul remains like white space does. So when I was finishing up this collection and sort of working with milkweed, I was doing some last minute revisions on the book and the poem specifically. By then I was really thinking about this idea of landscape and the idea of approaching the page as a field, as a landscape. And by that time, I was also very interested in sort of how Dene weavers sort of approach their rugs and approach their weavings. And it was really inspired by Orlando White and Sherwin Bitsui, who talked about their poetics in relationship to weaving and the way weavers approach their loom and their use of space. There goes use of space. And just the way basically the way rugs are woven and the way rugs are constructed, because it does take a lot. And my partner also weaves, and so one time I had to help him set up his loom, and it was a really sort of strenuous process of tightening and holding things in place and sort of rushing around the loom to make sure the tension was right in the warping. And so for me, that was exerting a lot of energy, and Orlando and I talked about this before, and sort of that energy, right, that is sort of put into constructing this physical constraint, right? This physical thing that's going to hold the rug in place can then be felt in the rug itself once it's finished, right? So if you pick up a Navajo rug, you can feel the tension, you can feel the tightness. You can also feel where maybe the weaver made a mistake and corrected it, or where the warping went loose, right? You can sort of feel the energy that was put into that particular rug. And for me, it made me think about Projective Verse by Charles Olson, right? And the idea of energy sort of being transferred from the poet to the poem to the reader, and trying to sort of bridge them together in a way. So I started late in this book, and sort of right now, I'm sort of writing all my poems through a specific process. So basically what I do is I either write a poem out in prose or just a poem generally that I would generally write. And then what I do is I actually sort of go through a process similar to constructing a loom or constructing a rug on a loom. So I'll cut out sort of individual strips of the poem itself, or if it's a prose block, I'll take each individual word and I'll shuffle them all together, and then I'll basically reorganize them from the bottom up, and I'll also have this mirror inversion as well. So it goes then from the top to the bottom on sort of the front part. And I have a visuals to explain this later. But that's just a sort of a process that I'm doing right now. And it started with this book. So I'm going to read two poems from Eyes Bottle Dark that sort of followed this process of randomization of the poem starting initially somewhere else and then sort of randomizing it and then ending up with this particular product. So this poem is called Mar. Buffalo burr veins around siltstone, mounds on the monocline. Flow rock smooths over into ore, cut leaf cornflower overgrown, pollen blown out, larkspur and bee plant on the meadow, grasp at the basement fault, taut atop diatreme, bulb liquid overflows into grasses, yellow sheen in the winds, laccolith ghost shadows over hungry dust, rains chew down medicine twigs, blue flax left as moans that foam into the sky, numb star erect over the horizon, burning bomb quiet as stone. And this poem is called Dust Storm. Sandburst shiver and outflow, get at water coughed up. A snake contorts spackled, dark puddle lilac, licked by heavy sun off smog soot. Gust rack, did up with cold front. He sees his body like a dead one. Then as a mirror unbroken, thin as mosquito wing, clouds glutton rain, and tongues rope spun. Best put as desire, as marrow coiled in spine, as question marks unbuttoned, so letters spill out. Wasp eye corners heavy as wind unfurl into him, gulp on parch, knots into sediments, legs warp diamond twill among cactus, lightning leaks from lip, thunderhead craned down, the beak punctures pinnacate beetle, virga carried on its back. He turns him on his back before joints explode into dust. Alkaline, fungi, wild carrot roots, sown in strata, collect again on teeth. So I'm going to share my screen now. And those last two poems again were constructed using this process that I'm going to show you right now. So this is one of the poems from my collection called Buffalo Grass. I'll quickly read it, then I'll quickly go through the sort of revision process, and I'll show you the end product of sort of what I'm doing now. So Buffalo Grass. Barely morning pink curtains drape an open window. Roaches scatter. The letter T vibrating in cottonwoods. His hair horsetail and snakeweed. I siphon doubt from his throats for the buffalo grass. Seep willow antler press against the memory of the first man I saw naked. His tongue a mosquito whispering its name, a hymn on mesquites, my cheek. The things we see the other do collapse words into yucca bone. The Navajo word for I hardens into the word for war. Oh, so let me get to the next page. Okay. So what I do basically is if I start out with a poem or start out with a prose block, so basically I sort of turn it into a prose block. So as you can see, this is what I did with Buffalo Grass. And I also sort of separate punctuation from sentences within the poem itself. Because for me, I feel like punctuation plays a deep part in poems themselves. And so I want to give them their due. their due credit, right? I give them their own sort of function within this prose block. Because ultimately what I'm going to do is, again, so basically what I do from here is I put this prose block into a word shuffler, word reorganizer, and I just use some free website called Online Random Tools, and basically you just plug in a prose block and it'll automatically shuffle all the words. So these are sort of the end results of all the words and punctuations shuffled. And then from there, I'll go through and I'll sort of mark or highlight or circle things that sort of stick out to me. Right. So, for example, here in this first block, I have the I with the 2 periods, right? So I feel like that's doing something that I can maybe pull from later. Then throat scatter. And then this particular sentence stood out to me the most. Is probably one of my favorite things that sort of stuck out from this is, I window naked words into a name, because for me that completes a sentence, right? Window becomes the verb, right? And so it becomes something else, right? And so I sort of keep going through. This is also one that I really enjoy: pink siphon against bone, right? And then there's some things that don't necessarily make sense, right? So I snakeweed other name, right? That doesn't make sense, but I can see its potential, right? If I sort of move things around, maybe it'll make sense. But I'm not really focused here on comprehension or content or it meaning anything. I'm just really focused on how it looks on the page, how they look together, and also how they sound, right? So seat whispering, or the words barely morning, right? Those types of things are really sort of sticking out to me. And then what I do is I basically collect all of these sort of highlighted areas, the ones I like the most, and then I'll sort of put them into a normal poem, right? Basically line by line going down the page. And then I'll go back to that website, onlinerandomtools.com. And this time they have a line reorganizer too. So they have a word shuffler, then a line shuffler. So then I'll put this there, then I'll shuffle it based on line. So this is the end result of the lines shuffled. And then of course, if you follow sort of the net weavers and their process, they always start from the bottom up. So what I do is I sort of then sort of invert it. But I don't get rid of this first half. I keep that first half. Because in weaving, right, weavers all the way always work up to the middle, and then they basically just repeat what they did on the bottom, right? Because they want the weaving to be equal and balanced and mirrored. And then I finally ended up with this end product. So I called it Loom Poem number 1, and I'll read this one. I window naked words into a name, first press the throats. I cheek hair, seep whisper, throat scatter, do the whispering, wore the words in the barely morning. I snakeweed another name, collapse tongue into war, memory, against pink siphon, against bone, bone, pink siphon, against memory, against collapse tongue into war. I snakeweed another name, wore the words in the barely morning, do the whispering, throat scatter, seep whisper, cheek hair. I first press the throats. I window naked words into a name. So then, as you can see, I sort of filled in, right? So I turned snakeweed other name to another name, right? So I tried to make these different changes to create a narrative of some kind, but also just sort of keeping everything as much as I could. So these are new works that I'm working on right now. I took these 3 poems from my first book and sort of used them as revision exercises, but all the poems I'm writing now for a hopefully new manuscript are following the same process. Some of them I'm doing the inversion like it's listed here. Other ones I'm completely sort of creating a whole new narrative out of them. So I'll do another one here. So this one is another poem from my first book, The Body a Bottle. Cracked hawkweed saccharum, nectar bitter from the flower. Its pelvis dyed matter dark, petal to sepal frazzled, limp like a lazy eye. Weed bud calcified on a bottle of muddy gin, water swollen in the body, yellow matter crushed into sand, fresh blood oozes at the lips, the hair matted roots, inlet of a river done in. So then again, I went through the same process here. This one didn't have any punctuation, of course, so I just went ahead and put it into normal prose block, then shuffled the words, and came across these really interesting combinations, right? So sepal swollen, dark bitter, crushed blood flower, it's gin yellow, matted gin into matter, petal dark, root water, of body dark, eye the sacrum, the sacrum weed, sand river done in. So for me, I felt like that was just enough to just call it a poem and basically end it right there. But I still went through the whole process because again, there's really no rules, right? So I can basically go back to this if I like it that much. But I did the same thing, right? So I have the words and then have it inverted or randomized and then inverted. And it was really interesting that the last and first word ended up with hawkweed, which was really interesting and how the randomization did that. So this is the how it came out, and I'll read this one. Loom poem 2. Sand river done in, of a body petal dark, sepal swollen, matted into matter, its gin yellow, dark, bitter, crushed, blood flower, root water, eye, the sacrum, the pelvis oozes, hawkweed, hawkweed, the pelvis oozes, root water, eye, the sacrum, crushed, blood flower, its gin yellow, dark, bitter, sepal swollen, matted into matter, mattered into matter of a body petal dark, sand river done in. So you can see I sort of added an additional line because I liked the notion of matted into matter and then mattered into matter. Sort of did something different. Sort of did something for me. And I'll end with this one here. So this is another one from In the Fields. And before I read this one, I just want to thank you so much for spending time with me this evening, spending time with us. It's not evening, so this, tonight, spending time with us tonight. Thank you so much to Orlando and Jesse for inviting me. Thank you to my fellow readers and presenters. So I'll just read this poem, and then it's in sort of its revised version, going through the loom process. So In the Fields, with lines from D.A. Powell. We unyoke owl pellets from marrow in desert meadow, his mouth pigeon eye, a torch, womb turned flower. He, still a boy, dug from cactus skull, undresses into bark beetles. He unlearns how to hold a fist with my hand, bursts into dandelion seeds. We all are beautiful at least once. Mudwater puddles along enamel, eye teeth blossom into osprey. Our bones dampen like snow melts under squirrel grass. We could be boys together finally as milkvetch, tumbleweed, and sticker bush. We can be beautiful again beneath the sumac, yarrow, and bitterwater. Right, so then going through the process here, and this is the end results here. So Loom Poem 3. Yarrow Desert. How seeds unyoke marrow. We owl into water. Boys burst together. Bee beneath. He melts blossom. We field into meadow grass water. To be once beautiful. All bark milk under. Eye teeth cactus. Beetles finally from pigeon. Osprey unlearns mouth. Sumac undresses. Sumac undresses. Osprey unlearns mouth. Beetles finally from pigeon. Eye teeth cactus. All bark milk under. To be once beautiful. Meadow grass water. We field into. He melts blossom. Bee beneath. Boys burst together. We owl into water. How seeds unyoke marrow. Yarrow Desert. Thank you so much.
Thank you.